Hey, welcome back again tonight. I'm sure I am glad you're tuning in again tonight. Let me really quick review this morning's sermon for you. This morning I started talking about prisoners of hope out of the book of Zechariah, and I'll reread that verse for you in just a minute. But this morning we talked about hope from a man who is young. That was number one. Number two, hope from a man who listened to his older generation. That was point number two, talking about his relationship with Haggai, who was probably his mentor in the ministry. Number three, hope from a man who understood prison. And he may not have personally been in prison, but most likely his parents or his grandparents were most likely slaves in Persia. And then number four, hope from a man who understood Jesus. And we talked about how Zechariah has more messianic prophecies about the upcoming Christ than any other of the minor prophets, which is quite a statement if you really think about that. Before I get into, I read the verse for you again, and before I get into the last 3 points of the sermon, let me just tell you a quick story that I think will kind of help you to understand where I'm going with this. A number of years ago, there was a study done, and I have to warn you, this is a little gross. Okay, I'm just bracing you for that. Okay, but they took a rat, and in this study done by some in a science lab, they took a rat and they put it in water, and they wanted to see how long a rat could swim before it would drown. And they just put him in, they stood around and watched, and in about an hour the rat drowned and died. Now I apologize, I did not do this personally, I'm just relaying the story. Okay, so about an hour the rat had died. Well, what they did is they took another rat, and the next day they put him in the water, and they let him swim for about 50 minutes. And after about 50 minutes, they got the rat out of the water, and they dried him off, and they gave him some food to eat, and he was fine. The next day, they let the rat swim for more than the 50 minutes they had before. They let him go, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. And but when it looked like he was really getting desperate, they pulled him out, they dried him off, they gave him some food to eat, and made him comfortable. They did it again the next day. They let him go for 2 hours. And after 2 hours, he started getting really desperate. They pulled him out. And they did this for several days in a row. And right when they got to where they thought, I just don't know if he can go any further, they would pull him out and treat him really, really, really well. Well, finally, they found that a rat could swim for 24 hours. They decided not to even go any further than that, because who knows how long he could have gone. But he could go on for 24 hours. Now, what is the difference between the rat who died after 1 hour in the water on the first try and the rat who made it 24 hours? The difference is this, that when they pulled him out before it got really bad, he knew there was hope. He knew there was hope. If that little rat knew that at some point I'm going to get pulled out of here, at some point I will get rescued, I know it's coming, I don't know when it's coming, he could swim and he could swim and he could swim. And I want to say this, that God has pulled me out of so many situations in my life. God has pulled me out time and time again. I have hope. I have hope in Jesus. And that's what the sermon this morning was about, and that's what the sermon tonight is about, that you can have hope. He's pulled you out time and time again. You can trust Him in this trial also. So I've already reviewed from this morning. Let me read the verse for you again from Zechariah chapter 9 and verse number 12. It's the verse that we're using as the text, and I'll just read the first part of the verse. It says, "Turn you to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope." Turn you to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope. So we gave you 1, 2, 3, and 4 this morning. Let me give you 5, 6, and 7 tonight. Number five, this is hope from a man who wanted everyone to have hope. It is hope from a man who wanted everyone. This young man, this man who listened to the older, wiser folks, this man who understood prison, and this man who understood Jesus, he wanted everybody to have that hope. Verse number 10, I love this. I'll just read the second half of verse number 10 out of this chapter for you. It says this, it says, "The battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace unto the heathen. From his dominion shall he be from sea even to sea, and from river even unto the ends of the earth." I think sometimes we get the idea that Old Testament believers that they were prejudiced. Okay, we get this idea they were prejudiced. They only wanted Jewish people to believe in their God. That is not the case. In fact, if you think about it, the people who came to the day of Pentecost over in the book of Acts, they came from all over northern Africa. They came from all over the place because they were converted to Judaism. So the Old Testament believers, they were not prejudiced whatsoever. He talks about wanting everybody to have this hope to the ends of the earth, from sea to sea. I think that tells you the heart of a man who has truly found hope. If you have found Jesus, I guarantee I know one thing about you. I know one thing about you if you have found Jesus, and that is this. You want everybody to find Jesus. You want everybody to find what you found. You have found the most amazing thing in the entire universe, and you want everybody. Listen, if there's not something in you boiling over to get the word out about salvation through Christ, you may not have it yourself. But here's a man who was talking to us about hope, prisoners of hope. And he wanted everybody to have that same hope. Number six, the next thing I want you to see about Zechariah and his comment about prisoners of hope. Number 6 is this. This is hope from a man who died in hope. Hope from a man who died in hope. You know, Hebrews chapter 11 talks about the great men of the faith from the Old Testament. And it talks about many who died, and it talks about many that he did not even name that died as martyrs. You know, many of the Old Testament prophets were killed because of their faith. Did you know that Zechariah was the last of the martyred prophets? He was the very last one. In fact, even Jesus talked about Zacharias. If you go back to Luke chapter 11, verses 49 through 51, Jesus makes reference to those who were killed for their faith, and he talks about on up to Zechariah. Here's a man, in fact, he talks about there at the altar of the temple. So here's Zechariah, a man who was a part of the Persian migration back to Israel. And when he got there, wouldn't you think there'd have been a great and mighty revival in Israel, that everybody was so excited to be home and so excited to be back in the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Wouldn't you think? Well, they killed him in the temple. Okay? Wow. Incredible. But here is a man that he called himself and called others prisoners of hope. That we are handcuffed to hope, but yet he gets home and he is martyred for his faith. You know what? They may have killed his body, but they did not kill his hope. They did not kill. In fact, when the moment that they succeeded in killing his body, he got to see his hope face to face. Now, pause and think about that for a minute. Pause and think about that. For him to be called a prisoner of hope, he got to see his master. He got to see his master. You know, I don't have any guarantee that I will be healed of every sickness or disease. I've got no physically healed here on earth. I have no guarantee of that. But I do have a guarantee that I will be healed of every sickness and every disease eventually when I see the Lord. There is nothing that can happen to me that can be negative in any way, because what's the worst somebody can do? Kill me? Is that the worst somebody can do? One of my favorite preachers was Dr. John R. Rice, and he was the editor of the Old Sword of the Lord years ago. And late one night, he went into the office to get some things, some books, and he was there in his office. There was a burglar in the building, and the burglar pointed a gun at him. And Dr. Rice looked over at him, and just if you ever heard his voice, he was just a sweet little old man. He said, "You can't scare me with heaven." And the burglar turned around and ran out of the building when he said that. You can't scare me with heaven. You know, that's the way I feel. Can't scare me with heaven. Heaven's not a bad thing. If we get there sooner, later, today, tomorrow, not a bad thing. You know why? Because we are prisoners of hope. It didn't scare Zechariah. It did not. And then finally, let me give you number 7. I'm going to wrap it up with this. All right. This is hope. A prisoner of hope. A man who's handcuffed to hope. Is hope from a man who understood his reward. Hope from a man who understood his reward. That's number 7. Verse number 12. I did not read the end of the verse. earlier. Let me read the whole verse to you now and put that end in there. Verse 12, it says, "Turn you to the stronghold, ye prisoners of hope." Now listen to this. "Even today do I declare that I will render double unto thee." You know what he was saying? He's saying God's going to reward us. This is hope from a man who understood the reward. He understood that. Hebrews 11:6 says that God is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. Luke chapter 6 verse 38, "Given it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over." I think that's Jesus' way in Luke of saying the same thing Zechariah said, double portion. Double portion. Listen, God knows your labor. God knows how faithful you've been, and God's going to reward you for it. And I believe that with all my heart. Hey, listen, you may feel handcuffed to your house. You may feel handcuffed to your family. You may feel handcuffed to a quarantine. But today, you need to understand you are handcuffed to hope. Put a smile on your face. Have the joy of Jesus in your heart, because it's all going to be just fine, I promise. All right, God bless you. I'll see you Wednesday.